7 matches in a row. A first-ever WTA title, a career-high ranking. And then, in the very next tournament, something broke, not a little, completely. 0 games in an entire set, 8 points total, against a woman ranked below her earlier this year. If you follow tennis even casually, you know that doesn't happen to players who are playing well. It happens when something else is going on underneath the surface. So, here's the question. What actually happened to Eala in Toronto? Because the story you're about to hear isn't really about one bad match. It's about what happens to a young athlete's body when the sport rewards success with something that looks a lot like punishment. Let's set the scene. It's Monday morning in Toronto. Eala walks onto center court at Sobeys Stadium carrying the kind of momentum most players wait a whole career to feel. Just 7 days earlier, she had done something no Filipina had ever done in the history of the sport. She'd beaten 3 top seeds in a row to win her first ever WTA title in Washington. She should have been floating. Instead, less than an hour and 15 minutes later, she walked off that same court having won a total of 8 points in the entire second set. 8. Now, before you assume this was just Belinda Bencic being brilliant, hold that thought. Because Bencic was good that day, sure. But something else was happening to Eala's body long before she ever stepped on that court. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. This isn't a story about talent disappearing overnight. Talent doesn't work that way. This is a story about a schedule, a body, and a system that almost never gives young athletes room to breathe when they're winning the most. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this collapse was, in a strange way, completely predictable. But to understand the fall, you first have to understand just how fast and how far this rise really was. Let's talk about how fast this actually happened, because the speed is the whole point. At the start of the summer, Eala was ranked 28th in the world. Good, respected, but not yet a headline name outside tennis circles. She was 21 years old, from the Philippines, trained for years at Rafael Nadal's academy in Spain, and known mostly for one thing: beating players she wasn't supposed to beat. Then Washington happened. She walked into the Mubadala DC Open and didn't just win matches. She dismantled seeded players one after another. She beat Elina Svitolina. She beat Naomi Osaka, a 4-time Grand Slam champion. And in the final, she came back from a set down to beat Jessica Pegula, the world number 3 and the highest-ranked American player in the draw. 4-6, 6-4, 6-love. Let that sink in for a second. She didn't just win the title. She closed it out by winning the last set 6-0 against one of the best players on the planet. That win made her the first Filipina in history to win a WTA singles title. It pushed her into the top 20 for the first time in her career, and it kicked off a winning streak that would eventually reach 7 straight matches, the longest of her entire career. This is the part where most stories would stop and celebrate. A Cinderella run. A history-making title. A star is born. But here's what almost nobody talked about in the moment. Winning a title doesn't come with a reward of rest. It comes with a reward of more tennis. Immediately. Just days after lifting that trophy in Washington, Eala had to pack up and fly straight to Toronto for the Canadian Open, a WTA 1000 event, one level up from what she had just won. Higher stakes, deeper draws, tougher opponents. And she was walking in on legs that had just played some of the most physically demanding tennis of her career. There was no 2-week break to recover, no quiet stretch to let her body reset. She received a bye into the second round, which sounds like a gift, but really just meant her first real test came against a dangerous American in Alicia Parks, and it went the distance, 3 sets. Then round 3, Caty McNally, another 3-setter, another battle that stretched well past 2 hours. So by the time Monday rolled around and she had to face Belinda Bencic, a former Olympic champion who has 10 career titles, including one at this exact tournament, Eala wasn't just facing a tough opponent. She was facing her on a body that had barely stopped moving for 2 straight weeks. This is the story nobody puts in the headline. Not she lost. But she never really got the chance to recover before she had to fight again. And once you know that, the score against Bencic starts to look less like a collapse and more like something else entirely. Something that was building quietly, match by match, without anyone noticing it until it was too late. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real layer underneath the scoreline, that's exactly what this channel is built around. Stick with me here, because what happened next in Toronto is where this story stops being about tennis and starts being about something every young athlete eventually has to face. Let's go back to the second round in Toronto, because this is where the first crack actually shows up, even though almost nobody clocked it at the time. Alex Eala faces Alicia Parks. On paper, this should be manageable. Eala had just won a title. Parks is talented but inconsistent. The match starts fine. Eala takes the first set 6-1. Dominant. Clean. Exactly what you'd expect from someone riding a wave of confidence. Then, the second set flips. Parks claws back and takes it 6-4. Suddenly, a match that looked like a formality turns into a battle. Eala has to grind out a third set just to survive, closing it 6-2. 3 sets. On day one of a brand new tournament. Just days after playing a marathon final in Washington, here's the first mini question worth sitting with. If her legs were already this tired after one title run, what happens after 2 more matches like this? Round 3 gives you the answer, and it's not a good one. Caty McNally, an American who knows how to make matches ugly and long, pushes Eala into a full 3-set war, 6-3. Then Eala drops the second set 5-7. The match stretches on, and somewhere in the middle of it, something happens that should have been the biggest warning sign of the entire tournament. Eala rolls her right ankle. She doesn't retire, she doesn't even take a medical timeout right away. She keeps playing, wincing, stopping between points to press her hand against her own foot, testing whether it will hold. And somehow, on will alone, she closes out the match, 6-4 inches the third. Now here's the second mini question. When an athlete is willing to fight through visible pain just to survive a third-round match, what does that tell you about how much is actually left in the tank for the next one? Because there is no time to answer that question properly. There's no week off to let a rolled ankle heal the way it's supposed to. There's no rest day built in for a body that just played back-to-back 3-set matches on hard courts, the most physically punishing surface in the sport. Instead, less than 48 hours later, Alex Eala has to walk out and face Belinda Bencic, a former Olympic gold medalist, a player who has 10 tour titles to her name. A woman who has been doing this at the highest level for over a decade and knows exactly how to find weakness in an opponent who isn't moving quite right. And this is where the picture gets almost impossible to ignore. Before the match even starts, you already have every ingredient sitting there in plain sight. A title-winning run that ended just over a week earlier. 2 brutal 3-set battles in a row to even reach this point. A right ankle that had been rolled and taped and pushed through, not properly rested. And an opponent who had also just survived her own 3-hour marathon the night before, but who is 29 years old, with a body and a career built around knowing exactly how to manage exhaustion. Eala is 21. This kind of physical literacy, knowing how to ration your energy across a brutal stretch of tournaments, isn't something that shows up overnight. It's something players usually learn the hard way, through years of exactly this kind of situation. So by the time she steps onto center court against Bencic, ask yourself the real question. Is this actually about who's the better tennis player that day? Or is this about who has more left to give? Because right now, on paper, everything points toward disaster. The schedule was too tight, the recovery time was non-existent, the injury was real, and the opponent across the net had every physical advantage that experience and fresher legs can buy. It's starting to look less like a tennis match and more like a countdown. And if you're watching this thinking there's no way out of a setup like this, you're not wrong to feel that way. Because on the surface, this problem looks completely unsolvable. A young athlete pushed to her physical limit, with no time to recover, walking straight into one of the toughest opponents on tour. But here's where the story takes a turn that almost nobody is talking about. Because what happened next wasn't really about Alex Eala failing to hold up. It was about something much bigger than her. Here's what most of the coverage got wrong about this loss. They called it a collapse. They called it fatigue catching up with her, as if this was simply a young player who ran out of gas. And sure, that's part of the story. But it's not the real story. The real story is this. Alex Eala didn't lose because she played badly. She lost because the system she operates in gave her almost no chance not to. Think about how professional tennis actually works. A player wins a title. That title comes with ranking points, prize money, and one more thing nobody talks about. An immediate reward of more tennis, higher level tennis, tougher draws, longer matches, all packed into the same stretch of weeks, often with barely enough time to fly between cities, let alone recover physically. There is no built-in pause button for success. The better you do, the more matches you're rewarded with, back to back, with almost no room to breathe. Now flip the assumption you probably walked into this video with. You likely thought this was a story about a talented young player who choked or who wasn't ready for the moment. But look again at what actually happened. She won 7 straight matches. She beat 3 top seeds to win her first title. She fought through actual physical pain just to survive a 3-set battle days before this loss. This isn't the profile of someone who isn't ready. This is the profile of someone who was asked to do too much, too fast, with too little recovery, and somehow made it further than anyone had a right to expect. Here's an analogy that makes this click. Imagine a marathon runner crosses the finish line after 26.2 miles completely spent, having just given everything they had, and instead of getting to rest, they're told, "Great job, now here's a 10K starting in a few days, and by the way, this one has hillier terrain and tougher competition." Nobody would call it a failure if that runner struggled in the second race. They'd call it exactly what it is, physically inevitable. That's what happened to Eala. Washington was the marathon. Toronto was the 10K she had almost no time to prepare for. And this reframe explains something that the scoreline alone can't. It explains why the second set against Bencic wasn't close. It wasn't 6-4, a tight set that got away from her. It was 6-love, total domination, 0 games, 8 points in an entire set, from a player who, 1 week earlier, had just outfought the world number 3 inches a deciding set. That kind of gap between 2 performances isn't a talent gap. Talent doesn't vanish in 7 days. What vanishes in 7 days, when you've played back-to-back 3-set matches on an injured ankle with no rest, is physical energy, explosiveness, the half a step of extra speed that turns a defensive shot into an offensive one, the strength in your legs to hold your serve under pressure in the biggest moments. That's not a mental collapse, that's a body that has nothing left to give. And once you see it this way, you stop asking, why did she lose so badly? And you start asking a much more interesting question. How did she manage to make it as far as she did, carrying all of that in the first place? Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a convenient excuse, stick with me, because this isn't just a theory. There is actual evidence sitting right there in the numbers, in her own words after the match, and even in what an expert who has coached some of the greatest players in tennis history had to say about her game. And once you see all of it laid out together, it's going to be very hard to see this loss the same way again. What's your read on this? Do you think the WTA schedule is genuinely unfair to young breakout stars? Or is this just the price every rising player has to pay on the way up? Drop your take in the comments, because the next section is going to give you the receipts either way. Let's get into the receipts, because this isn't just a theory anymore. It's a pattern, and patterns don't lie. Start here. This wasn't the first time Eala has been completely blanked in a set when her body was running on empty. Back in March, at the Miami Open, she lost a set 0-6 to Karolina Muchova. Same story, a total shutout, the kind of scoreline that only happens when a player has nothing physical left to give in that moment. Toronto wasn't a one-off disaster. It was the same warning sign showing up again, months later, under almost identical conditions. Now put Bencic next to her in this equation, because the contrast tells you everything. Bencic didn't walk into that match fresh either. The night before, she had survived her own brutal 3-hour and 24-minute battle against Taylor Townsend just to reach the 4th round. She was tired too. But Bencic is 29 years old. She has a 2020 Olympic gold medal. She has 10 career titles, including one at this exact tournament, where she beat Serena Williams in the semifinal. She has spent over a decade learning how to win matches when her legs don't have much left, how to close out a set efficiently instead of grinding out every single point. Eala is 21. She's 2 years into truly competing at this level. That kind of physical economy, knowing exactly how to ration your energy across a brutal week, isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn through exactly this kind of painful experience over years, not months. So when Bencic swept that second set 6-0, winning over 61% of total points in the match, that wasn't her being unstoppable. That was 2 tired players on the same court, but only one of them had the experience to manage being tired. And here's a detail that confirms the exhaustion story straight from Eala herself. In her press conference right after the loss, she was asked what she planned to do next. Her answer wasn't about tactics or training. She said she'd take maybe a day or two off. Then she mentioned needing a haircut because she hadn't had time to get one in a while. Think about how small and human that detail is. Not talk of fixing her serve, not talk of a training camp. Just a player who sounded like someone who genuinely needed a break from being a professional athlete for 48 hours. That's not the language of someone reflecting on a tactical failure. That's the language of someone who is simply worn out. And there's one more piece of this puzzle that almost nobody has connected to the bigger picture. Rick Macci, the coach who worked with both Serena and Venus Williams, has been publicly breaking down Eala's game on social media for weeks. His praise has been enormous. He's called her a future top 10 player, someone who takes the ball early and cuts angles as well as anyone he's seen. But he's also pointed to one specific weakness, her serve. He said the biomechanics aren't fully there yet, that the timing between her leg drive and her racket entry is off, and that fixing it could unlock a completely different level. Here's why that detail matters right now. A serve with imperfect mechanics costs you more energy to execute under pressure than a technically efficient one. So on a night when Eala's legs already had almost nothing left, the one shot in her game, already known to be physically inefficient, became the first thing to break down completely. That's not a coincidence. That's exhaustion finding the exact weak point that was already there, waiting. So let's connect this all the way back to where we started. 7 straight wins, a historic title, then a total collapse in a single set, 6 in love, 8 points, against a far more experienced opponent who was equally exhausted but knew how to manage it. This wasn't Alex Eala losing her talent overnight. It was her body, running on a schedule that gave her almost no time to recover, hitting its absolute limit at the worst possible moment against the one opponent experienced enough to make her pay for it. The pieces all fit. The Miami shutout, the physical mismatch in experience, her own words about needing rest, even the specific technical weakness that Macci had already flagged weeks earlier. So the real question isn't why did she lose this badly? The real question is what happens next. So no, Alex Eala did not lose her talent overnight. She didn't suddenly forget how to play tennis. What actually happened is much simpler, and honestly, much more human. Her body reached the end of what it could give, at the exact moment the schedule demanded the most from it. 7 straight wins. A historic title in Washington. 2 brutal 3-set battles to even reach the 4th round in Toronto. An ankle injury she pushed through instead of resting. And then, finally, a wall she couldn't push past anymore, against an opponent with a decade more experience in exactly how to win when your legs have nothing left. That's not a collapse. That's a body sending a message. And the only real question now is whether anyone around her is going to listen to it. Because here's what's coming next. The Cincinnati Open starts in just a few days. Another WTA 1000 event, another brutal draw, and by her own admission, Eala is getting maybe a day or two off before she has to be back on a plane. The same cycle that led to Toronto is already starting again. So will Cincinnati be where she bounces back and proves this was just one rough night? Or will it be where this exact same story repeats itself because the schedule still hasn't given her the room to actually recover? That's the part nobody can answer yet. Not the analysts, not the coaches, not even Eala herself. But I'll be watching Cincinnati closely because it's going to tell us a lot more about this story than one bad set in Toronto ever could. If you want to know how it plays out, this is exactly the kind of story I'll be following here, match by match, layer by layer, the parts that never make it into the headline. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens when she steps back on that court.